I sold the house I'd lived in for over 40 years, the one where I raised my son, where I took care of my husband through cancer, where I'd planted every flower by hand and packed up everything I had left into 2 suitcases, not because I wanted to, because I had no other choice. My pension couldn't keep up with property taxes, medical bills, and repairs. I thought, at least I'll be with family. I thought my son would understand what it meant to give your whole life for someone, but when I arrived at his front door, I had no idea I was walking into the first chapter of what would become a very quiet kind of revenge story. The day I left Pittsburgh, the sky was cloudy, like it wanted to cry with me but didn't know how. I stood outside my old house, a modest 2-bedroom brick home on Birch Lane, not much by today's standards, but it held everything. My wedding, my baby boy's first steps, the day Harold came home with the cancer diagnosis that changed our lives. Now it was gone, sold for a fraction of its worth, just enough to pay off the last of Harold's hospital debt, clear the overdue water bill, and leave me with what I thought would be enough to start over. I didn't realize at the time I wasn't starting over, I was being reduced. I called Michael the only person I had left in the world, my son. "Honey," I said gently, "I'm selling the house. I think it's time I come live with you for a while." There was a pause, a long one. "Let me talk to Carla first," he said. Carla, his wife. We'd never been close, polite, sure, but warmth. I was always more of a holiday obligation than a welcome guest. 3 days later, Michael called back. "We've talked. You can come, temporarily, just until you find something suitable." I held the phone against my ear and whispered, "Thank you." But something about the way he said temporarily landed heavy in my chest, like I was a package to be rerouted, like I had an expiration date. Still, I packed my things. 2 suitcases. That's what a lifetime of sacrifice boils down to when you've been quietly giving everything away for decades. My wedding dress, donated. Harold's books, left in a box for the local library. The rocking chair where I used to hold Michael, too bulky to take, too painful to leave. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I didn't cry. I didn't let myself. I told myself I was heading toward comfort, toward family. That maybe, just maybe, Michael would appreciate what I had done for him. Maybe he would remember. Because I remembered everything. I remembered holding him through fevers, working overnight shifts at the hospital so I could be home in the morning to make his lunches. I remembered the birthday parties I planned by hand, even when we had no money, turning flour and water into papier-mâché castles, sewing his Halloween costumes from scratch. I remembered refusing Harold's idea of moving to Florida after retirement just so Michael wouldn't feel abandoned. I gave up vacations, new clothes, friendships, even a second chance at love, just to make sure Michael always felt like he came first. But sons don't always remember. The train ride to Arlington was quiet. I stared out the window as cities blurred into trees, into suburbs, into the new life I thought I was entering. I kept imagining what the reunion would be like. Would Michael hug me? Would Carla set the table for dinner? Would they toast to new beginnings? I pictured us watching TV together at night, maybe walking to the grocery store like neighbors do. But what waited for me at the other end wasn't warmth. It wasn't welcome. It was weathered silence. Measured smiles. A too clean house that smelled like lavender and money. Carla met me at the door with that tight-lipped grin she always wore when she wanted to seem polite but didn't want me there. "Evelyn," she said, stepping aside just enough to let me pass. "You're here." Michael wasn't home yet. The timing felt planned. I stood awkwardly in the foyer, feeling the strain of my old travel shoes pressing against the polished hardwood floor. The suitcases looked embarrassingly worn. I hadn't bought new luggage in over a decade. "You have a lovely home," I said, trying to keep things light. Carla gave a nod. "We renovated last year. The upstairs is all hardwood now. Michael works from home, so he needs quiet." That sentence landed like a message. We walked through the kitchen. Not to the stairs, not to any part of the house I assumed I'd stay in. Instead, she led me out the back door. "I'm afraid the guest room is being redone," she said. "So we set up something temporary out here." The air in the backyard was damp. My shoes sank slightly into the grass as we walked to the far corner of the property. That's when I saw it. A barn. Old. Square. Painted beige like the house. I knew instantly this was no guest room. It had once stored tools. Maybe paint cans. Maybe lawn chairs. Now it was mine. Carla unlocked the door. We added a heater, a cot, and a bathroom last summer, she said, like it was a gift. Wi-Fi's a little weak, but it works. I stepped inside. The air smelled like old insulation and lemon cleaner. One bed, one chair, one narrow window that looked directly into a wooden fence. My voice caught in my throat, but I managed to nod. Make yourself comfortable, Carla said. Dinner's at 6. She closed the door behind her. I sat on the bed. It creaked beneath me. I looked around at the 4 walls. No photos, no curtains. No sign this space had ever meant anything to anyone. Except now, it meant something to me. It meant you're no longer someone worth keeping in the house. It meant you are not a mother. You are an obligation, a burden, a problem that needs to stay out of the way. The heater rattled when I turned it on. I placed Harold's photo on the bedside table. His smile, faint but kind, met mine. I'm here, I whispered. But I don't think they really see me. The first night in the barn was worse than I expected. The mattress was lumpy. The heater groaned like it was dying, and the thin walls did nothing to block out the cold or the silence. And that silence wasn't peaceful. It was empty. It echoed with everything that should have been said and wasn't. Michael hadn't even come out to greet me when he got home. Not a hug, not a welcome home. Mom, nothing. The next morning, I woke up stiff, every joint aching. I used the tiny bathroom that could barely fit me standing. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection startled me. My face looked older somehow. Not from time, but from displacement, like something essential had been taken. I dressed and walked slowly toward the main house. The kitchen door was locked, so I knocked lightly. A minute later, Carla opened the door, clearly surprised. Margaret, she said, voice tight. You're up early. I usually am, I replied with a polite smile. Old habits from nursing. She didn't invite me to sit. Instead, she turned her back and walked toward the coffee machine. I stood there, unsure whether to follow or wait. Would you like some coffee? She asked over her shoulder. Yes, please, I answered. We sat at the breakfast bar, her scrolling on her phone, me trying not to feel like an intruder. The silence between us was heavy with unsaid things. Finally, I broke it. How's Michael? He got home late last night. She looked up, her expression unreadable. Yeah, he works a lot. Another wall. Another unspoken rule. Don't ask questions. Don't expect warmth. Later that morning, Michael came into the kitchen. His hair was wet from the shower, shirt untucked. He looked like a stranger wearing my son's face. Morning, he said, avoiding my eyes. Good morning, I replied gently. Did you sleep well? He shrugged. Yeah. Busy day ahead. I waited for more. Some mention of the fact that I was now living in his backyard. A gesture. Anything. Do you have everything you need out there? He asked finally, gesturing vaguely toward the barn. It's a little cold in the mornings, I admitted. And the water doesn't really get hot. Michael nodded, already pulling out his keys. I'll take a look at it this weekend. Carla chimed in. We're trying to keep the utility bills down. That space was never really meant for long-term use. The word stung more than I let on. Not meant for long-term use, like me. After breakfast, I offered to help with the dishes, but Carla waved me off. We have a dishwasher, she said. You should rest. But rest from what? I had no tasks, no purpose, no place. Just an old woman put in storage. That evening, as I walked back to the barn, I passed by the dining room window and heard voices. Heated ones. You could have at least tried to act happy she's here, Michael said. I did, Carla snapped. But let's not pretend this wasn't your idea. My idea? You're the one who said it was a good opportunity. There was a pause. Then Carla whispered, keep your voice down. She might hear. I stopped, my feet frozen on the grass. I had heard every word. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't even family. I was a transaction. Later that night, sitting alone on the creaky bed, I stared at the ceiling. A small cobweb danced slightly in the corner, catching the weak light from the bulb. I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me how I felt. Not politely, but really asked. Viewers, have you ever given everything to someone? Your time, your love, your entire life, and then one day realized they saw you as nothing but an inconvenience, a shadow in their house? If you have, then maybe you understand what that night felt like. And if you do, I hope you never forget how it made you stronger. The next day, Carla handed me a small electric bill and said, "Just if you want to chip in, since the heater runs constantly." She said it sweetly, almost too sweetly, like the kind of sweetness that covers a knife. "Of course," I replied, folding the paper without looking. "Let me know what's fair." Fair. What a strange word in this place. Michael began to leave early and come home late. I barely saw him. Carla continued to play the hostess, but always with that tight smile, always reminding me this wasn't home. One afternoon, while I was folding my clothes on the bed, I noticed a familiar photo frame had cracked. It was a picture of me holding Michael as a baby. Both of us smiling. I ran my finger along the glass, feeling the jagged edge. Back then, I'd held him like the world depended on it. Now, I was lucky if he remembered I was still out here. That night, over dinner, they asked about the house sale. "Did it go through?" Michael asked casually. "Yes," I said. "2 weeks ago." "Did you get a good price?" Carla asked quickly, almost too quickly. "A fair one," I replied. "Where's the money now?" Michael asked. "Just to make sure you're secure." I paused. "Some in the bank, some in savings bonds." Harold always believed in diversifying. Michael nodded slowly. Carla smiled. But I saw it, the flicker in their eyes. The same flicker I used to see in patients who were hiding something. That glint of quiet calculation. I cleared my plate and stood. "Thanks for dinner." "No problem," Carla said, stacking plates. "Breakfast is at 8. If you're up early..." "I always am," I said softly. I returned to the barn and closed the door behind me. The wind picked up outside, rattling the thin frame. I wrapped myself in an old sweater and sat at the table, staring at the picture of Harold. "I don't think they see me." "Harold," I whispered. "But I'm still here." And deep inside, a small ember flickered. Faint, but growing. Something had shifted. The days passed like slow drips from a leaky faucet. Steady, silent, and wearing me down. I began to understand something no one tells you, that you can be surrounded by people and still feel like you're fading from the world. Not all disappearances come with a bang. Some come in whispers, in silence, in glances that look through you instead of at you. In that barn, I became invisible. Each morning I walked to the main house for coffee and small talk. I smiled when they smiled, nodded when they nodded, and kept quiet when they didn't want to talk, which was often. I learned not to expect more than the bare minimum. A polite hello, a plate of dinner reheated in the microwave, a good night, Margaret, spoken over their shoulders as they walked out of the room. One afternoon, I offered to help with laundry. Carla said they had it covered. Another day, I offered to cook. "We already have a routine," she replied. Not unkindly, but firmly. I understood what that meant. I wasn't meant to be part of the rhythm of their lives. I was an offbeat note, something that didn't quite fit. Michael barely spoke to me unless it was about logistics, utilities, errands, weather, the conversations that used to matter, the ones about his dreams or fears or just how he was doing, were long gone. I don't think he even noticed. One night, I walked into the kitchen and heard Carla whispering something about me on the phone. She didn't see me at first. She said, "No, it's not ideal. She's in the barn, but it's fine for now. No, I don't think she'll last long." She turned and saw me. Her face didn't even change. "Oh, hi, Margaret," she said, hanging up, just talking to my sister. I nodded, not asking. I'd learned not to ask. Later that week, I overheard them whispering again, Michael and Carla, in their bedroom. I caught phrases like, "If she gives us more, and we'll have to push a little harder." My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. I knew that tone. It was the sound of planning, of preparation. Like I was some puzzle piece they were figuring out how to move. The next day, Michael came to the barn. He carried a cup of tea and a folded paper. "Thought you might want something warm," he said, handing me the tea. Then he sat down in the only chair. "We've been thinking," he began, smoothing out the paper. "You've been so generous. We really appreciate the help with the heating bill and the groceries. It's made things easier." I smiled politely, waiting for the catch. He continued, "But we've hit a rough patch. Just a short-term thing. A loan. Something to keep us afloat." He asked for $30,000. Just like that. Like asking for a cup of sugar. I stared at him for a long time before answering. "Michael," I said slowly, "that's a lot of money." "I know," he said quickly. "It's just until we stabilize. You know I'd never ask unless we really needed it." I didn't respond. I didn't have the words yet. He left the tea on the table and said, "Think about it. No pressure." But there was pressure. That night at dinner, Carla was suddenly warm. She made roast chicken, my favorite, and offered me the first piece. She asked if I needed anything from the store. If I was sleeping okay. The sudden kindness was so sharp it almost hurt. They were playing nice now, because they thought there was more to get. A few days later, I agreed to give them $10,000. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't want to believe my own son would treat me like this. I needed to give him one last chance. I told myself it wasn't manipulation, that maybe, just maybe, he was in trouble and needed his mother. They accepted the check with such gratitude, I almost believed it. But that very weekend, I saw Carla carrying a shopping bag with a designer logo. Michael had a new watch. And the following week, they went out for dinner and drinks with friends while I sat in the barn eating oatmeal by the flickering light of the heater. That's when the truth sank in. This wasn't about survival. This wasn't desperation. It was entitlement. They believed they deserved my money. Because I was old, because I'd given before, because I was still breathing. And because I had nothing else to offer but money, I started to notice the little things more clearly. Then, how Carla never said thank you after I gave them that check. How Michael never asked how I was doing unless he needed something. How neither of them ever looked me in the eye when I brought up Harold. It was like he'd never existed. And, in a way, neither had I. I had become background noise in the life of the boy I had raised, fed, protected, and loved. I had become the flickering light in the barn, tolerated, but not important, necessary, only for utility. And worst of all, I had let it happen. Piece by piece, year after year, I started to keep my own receipts. Not for groceries, for moments. I wrote them down in a little notebook I kept under my pillow. He forgot my birthday. She called me the old woman when she thought I couldn't hear. They used the money I gave them for a vacation. They never asked me how I was sleeping. They never asked if I was okay. Loss doesn't always look like funerals. Sometimes it looks like a quiet Tuesday when you realize no one sees you anymore. I hadn't lost my son to death. I'd lost him to something far colder, indifference. And that night, as I sat on the bed and stared out through the fogged-up window of the barn, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep shrinking. I couldn't keep waiting to matter again. It happened on a Thursday, a perfectly ordinary day, the kind where nothing should change. And yet everything quietly shifted. I had walked to the post office that morning, a slow 15-minute stroll from the house. The breeze was gentle, and spring had started to soften the air. I remember thinking, maybe today will feel better. Maybe I'll be noticed. I needed to check on a bank statement. My monthly pension had been late, and I didn't want to bother Michael or Carla with it. They already treated every small inconvenience like I was some added weight they had to carry. At the teller's window, I handed over my ID and smiled politely. The woman behind the glass looked down at the screen, then back at me. "Looks like your name is no longer listed as a primary on this account," she said. "It's been updated to a joint authorization with Michael Carter." I blinked. "What?" "Yes. Here, it says there was a signature authorization processed last month." I felt something cold move through me. "I didn't authorize that," I said quietly. She tilted her head. The signature on file matches what we have. I looked at the screen, at the digital version of my own name, shaky and unsure, like someone signing something they didn't really read. Suddenly, I remembered that day, weeks ago, when Michael brought me a folder of papers and said they were for transferring funds more easily. Said he needed them signed because, Mom, banks are annoying. And this just speeds things up. I hadn't questioned it, because I wanted to believe that no son would manipulate his own mother, because I still thought I was safe with my own child. But in that moment, standing under the two bright fluorescent lights of a small-town bank, I realized the truth. I had handed over the last thing I truly owned, my trust, and it had been traded for convenience. I walked back slowly, my shoes crunching the gravel at the edge of the road. My mind played a loop of everything I had overlooked. Carla's sudden interest in how much money I had, Michael's subtle pressure, the way they both relaxed after I handed over the check for $10,000. That night, they had opened a bottle of wine and laughed on the back porch like they'd won something. Because they had won access to everything I'd built over a lifetime. I didn't confront them right away. No shouting, no tears. I just watched. I watched the way Carla smiled at me over dinner, her eyes calculating behind her lashes. I watched how Michael started using words like "we" when referring to my money. "We'll figure out what to do with it," he'd said the night before. "We'll make smart decisions." We. As if I was a footnote in my own life. I began waking up earlier than usual, earlier than even the birds. I'd sit at the little table in the barn and write in a notebook I kept hidden beneath my pillow. Not poetry, not diary entries, just facts. Date: Carla purchased 2 handbags, boutique brand. Date: Michael withdrew $1, $500 labeled investment consultation. Date: I was not asked how I was feeling. Again, each line a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. I wasn't here to be loved. I was here to be used up gently. That Sunday, Carla brought in a tray with tea and banana bread. She called it just a little something for a cozy evening. I thanked her, smiled, played my role. But inside, I was gone. That's what no one warns you about. The worst kind of betrayal isn't a slap or a scream. It's a smile with a sharp edge. It's being needed only for what you have, not who you are. Later that night, I stood by the barn window, the one that looked into the shadows of the backyard. The moon was low, casting silver light on the outline of the house I once dreamed of calling home. And I heard them again. Michael's voice, low, but clear. "She'll give us the rest. She's too proud to say no," Carla replied. "And if she doesn't, we'll make it uncomfortable. She won't want to stay. That barn is already miserable. Are you sure she has anything left?" "She does. I saw her savings bonds. She's sitting on more." And then Carla's laugh. "Then we push a little. Guilt works. Remind her she has no one else. No one else." I sat down on the bed and stared at the floor. That was it, wasn't it? The truth stripped bare. They weren't waiting for me to die. Not quite. But they were waiting for me to break, to give in, to let them squeeze every last penny before I quietly faded away. And I'd almost let them, because mothers want to believe, we want to think we raised better. We want to hope that love means something. But sometimes, love isn't enough. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply opened my notebook and wrote one sentence: "They don't love me. They don't see me, but I see them now." The next morning, I called a lawyer, and then I called Sunset Haven. A woman named Gloria picked up. Her voice was warm and kind. The way a stranger can be when they have no agenda. I asked if they had a studio apartment available. Something simple, something clean. "We do," she said. "Would you like to schedule a visit?" "Yes," I said. "Tomorrow morning." First thing, I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the table. Something inside me had changed. I wasn't disappearing anymore. I was preparing. I didn't pack much. 2 suitcases, same as when I arrived. Funny, isn't it? You can give someone your whole life, raise them, fight for them, and still leave with less than you came in with. But this time, the bags didn't feel like defeat. They felt like freedom. The morning I left, The house was quiet. Carla was in the shower. Michael was out jogging. I left a small envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter, not bitter, not angry, just honest. Thank you for letting me stay. I now understand my place in your life, and I accept it. I've made arrangements to live somewhere else. Please don't contact me about money again. I've already made the necessary legal changes. Mom! That was it. No emotion, no drama, just facts. The taxi pulled into the driveway as the sun was rising. The air was crisp. I looked back at the house one last time, not because I was unsure, but because I needed to see it clearly, without the illusions I had clung to for so long. It wasn't my home, and maybe it never really had been. Sunset Haven wasn't fancy. No chandelier, no golf course, but it was clean, quiet, safe. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchenette, and a window that looked out onto a courtyard where sparrows liked to gather. I stood in the middle of the empty room, set down my bags, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time in years, no one was watching me like I was a burden. No one was measuring my worth against my bank account. No one expected me to smile to keep the peace. I was just me, the woman who used to sing in the kitchen while baking pies. The woman who loved watercolor painting before Michael was born. The woman who once laughed so hard she dropped a whole casserole on the floor and didn't even care. I'd forgotten her. Now I wanted her back. The next few weeks moved slowly, like healing often does. I started walking again. Just 20 minutes each morning around the building. The other residents would nod politely. Some waved. Some offered stories of their grandkids, their aches, their gardens. There was no pretending here, just people with soft eyes and quieter lives. I started painting again, too. I bought a small set of watercolor tubes at the local art store, nothing fancy, and found an easel in the donation room. My first painting was of the window in the barn, the cracked glass, the little spider web in the corner, the pale light that used to fall across my pillow. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real, and it was mine every day. I grew lighter. I read old books. I made my own meals, exactly the way I liked them. I played Frank Sinatra from my little speaker and danced by myself on the balcony with no one to roll their eyes. No more tiptoeing around Carla's moods. No more guilt. No more manipulation. Just mornings and coffee and peace. I made an appointment with a financial advisor, a woman named Lila with gray curls and sharp eyes. She helped me create a private account. Everything was moved out of Michael's reach. I've seen this before, she said gently. Looking over the documents Michael had tricked me into signing. You're not alone, I nodded. But I didn't cry. I'd already done my crying. One afternoon, as I was trimming the lavender plant on my windowsill, my phone rang. Michael. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. No voicemail. 2 hours later, Carla called. Then again, and again. Finally, a message came through. Mom, what's going on? Where are you? Why did you leave like that? We're worried. Please call back. We need to talk about the bank stuff. There it was. Not, are you okay? Not, we miss you. Just the bank stuff. I turned off the phone and slid it into the drawer. Whatever they were looking for, they wouldn't find it in me anymore. The funny thing about silence is that once you get used to it, you start to prefer it over noise, especially the kind of noise that comes from fake affection, from forced smiles, from being tolerated but not loved. One evening, I sat with Gloria, the woman who ran activities at Sunset Haven. She asked if I wanted to help organize an art exhibit for the residents. I said yes. We hung watercolor pieces on the walls of the main hall. Sunsets, flowers, old barns, birds. Mine was among them. It wasn't labeled with my name, just a tiny paper card that read, "Still here." That painting wasn't for anyone but me. I'm not sure what Michael tells people now. Maybe he says I wandered off. Maybe he says I had a breakdown. Maybe he doesn't mention me at all. That's fine. I didn't leave to be noticed. I left to be whole and in that little apartment. With the cracked window and the cheap paint and the lavender plant that leans too far to the left, I finally was. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. And with them, so did I. I wasn't angry anymore. Not bitter. Just free. Free in a way I hadn't been in decades. Free from proving my worth. Free from giving and waiting. Free from asking to be loved by people who only saw what they could take. I woke each morning to birdsong and the smell of brewed coffee from the community kitchen. I taught a watercolor class every Wednesday. I had lunch with Margaret and Paul, two retired teachers who liked to argue about jazz. On Sundays, I played bingo even though I never won, and I laughed at the same jokes every time. It was a quiet life, but it was mine. Then one afternoon, as I was reading on the bench beneath the courtyard tree, I saw a figure at the gate. Michael. He stood there with his hands in his pockets. Older than I remembered. Tired. Thinner, maybe. His eyes scanned the courtyard like he wasn't sure what he was looking for. When he spotted me, he didn't smile. Just walked over slowly and sat down beside me without asking. "Hey, Mom." I closed my book and looked at him. "I didn't know you knew where I lived," I said softly. He gave a dry laugh. "Carla found a forwarding address on some paperwork. I didn't expect it to be a place like this." He said it like it was beneath me, like I had fallen. I smiled gently. "It's peaceful." He nodded. We noticed the accounts were frozen." I said nothing. He cleared his throat. "I didn't come to talk about money." I turned toward him, and for the first time in a long time, I really looked. His shoulders were slouched, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of someone who finally realized what they had thrown away. "I came," he continued, "because I think I owe you an apology." I waited. I took you for granted," he said. "I let Carla lead, and I didn't stop it. And I knew you weren't happy. But I kept telling myself it was just temporary, that you were fine." I looked up at the tree above us. A soft breeze moved through the branches. "You weren't." He added, "Were you?" I shook my head. "No, Michael, I wasn't." We sat in silence. Birds chirped. A couple passed by, arm in arm. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said after a moment. I needed to say it. I didn't nod. I didn't cry. I just let the words settle into the quiet. "You made choices," I said finally, "and I made mine." He looked down at his hands. "Are you happy here?" "Yes," I said. "I am, and I meant it." He stood. "If you ever want to come back or visit." I looked at him calmly. "I think it's better this way." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then closed it. His eyes looked wet, but he blinked quickly and smiled a little. "You were always stronger than me," he whispered. Then he turned and walked out of the courtyard gate, the same way he came. That night, I sat at my little kitchen table, a warm cup of tea in my hands. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who stood in the shadows of her own family, the one who waited by doors, reheated dinners, and apologized for needing warmth. She was gone now. What remained was someone softer, but not weaker, quieter, but not silent. Someone who had learned that sometimes the only way to be seen is to leave and not come back. The next day, I painted again. This time, a garden full of lavender and wildflowers. No fences, just open space. I named it Release. And to those watching now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever given your whole life to someone, only to be made to feel like a burden, like your love had an expiration date the moment you stopped being useful? If so, then maybe this story isn't just mine. Maybe it's yours too. And maybe it's time you remember your worth doesn't shrink just because someone else stops seeing it. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to fight to win. Sometimes all you need to do is walk away and never look back.